Under the cooling hush of dusk, Eleanor Mayfield moved across the dirt road with the heaviness of a woman twice her age, though she was only 24. The sun had melted into the horizon, its last orange flames stretching across the plain, making the town's clapboard buildings glow like embers ready to turn to ash. Her bare feet struck the ground in halting rhythm, each step sending a quiet tremor through her body, as though the earth itself recognized the weight she carried. Dust clung to her hem, her dress frayed and torn, and her face, though once soft with girlish promise, was carved now with lines of hunger, grief, and nights gone too long without rest. In towns like this, nothing stayed hidden, not even sorrow. Eyes followed her from windows and porches, whispers rolled like tumbleweed, and though no one shouted outright, the judgment hung heavier than the Texas heat. They said she was cursed, unfit, a woman marked by a man who had left her broken in body and spirit. Eleanor bore those words silently, pressing her lips together as if holding them back from cutting deeper than they already had. The worst wound was not the limp in her step or the aching in her wrists. It was the knowing that her pain had become a kind of entertainment for others. She kept her gaze low, past the boards of the general store and the saloon's swinging doors, down the narrow alley where the light dwindled. Her plan was simple. Keep moving, keep breathing, keep from collapsing in front of those who wanted proof of her ruin. But her body betrayed her. Breath hitched, the ground seemed to tilt beneath her, and with a sound no louder than a sigh, Eleanor fell into the tall grass just beyond the road. The field stretched endless, fragrant with hay, the stalks whispering against one another as the night breeze passed through. It was there, half hidden among the golden stalks, that Silas Boone found her. He was a rancher, a man of few words, known more for the steadiness of his silence than for any act of boldness. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet gravity of someone who had already buried too much. Parents lost to fever, a brother to a river swollen with spring melt, and dreams that had long since been traded for survival. He had been riding home from the edge of his pasture when he spotted her collapsed shape, pale against the dusk, a figure almost swallowed by the earth itself. He dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the grass. For a moment, he simply stood above her, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. It was not curiosity that kept him still but respect, as though he feared that to move too quickly would shatter what little strength she clung to. Then he knelt, his voice rough from disuse yet surprisingly tender. "Miss," he murmured, "you're hurt." Her eyelids fluttered, lashes sticky with sweat and dust. The words she forced past her lips were broken, a moan stitched with pain. "Go slow! It hurts." Silas felt the plea strike deeper than any bullet. He did not rush. His hands hovered, calloused palms hesitant, waiting for her to allow his touch. When at last he slipped his arm beneath her shoulders, it was with the gentleness of someone lifting a bird with a broken wing. He steadied her upright, letting her lean against his chest. She smelled faintly of smoke and earth, of nights weathered without shelter. His reply came low, firm, carrying the weight of an oath that seemed older than both of them. "I'll die before I hurt you." Something passed between them then, fragile as a spider's web, yet unbreakable in its honesty. Eleanor did not answer. She had learned that words could betray, that promises often cut deeper than cruelty. But in the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, she felt a truth no gossip could twist. She allowed herself to rest in his hold, though fear flickered still beneath her ribs. He lifted her into the saddle, swung up behind her, and guided the horse toward his cabin on the edge of the valley. The ride was silent but not empty. Each hoofbeat echoed with questions unasked. Why she was alone, why no one had offered her shelter, why she carried shame that was not hers to bear. Silas did not demand answers. His silence was its own form of mercy, a space wide enough for her to breathe without judgment pressing in. When the horse stopped, Eleanor stirred. Through half-lidded eyes, she saw the outline of a small cabin, smoke rising thin from its chimney, lantern light glowing like a promise from the window. Silas carried her inside and set her upon a narrow bed, his movements careful, almost reverent. He fetched water, dampened a cloth, and wiped the dust from her brow. Each gesture was deliberate, as though he was teaching her body to believe in gentleness again. Eleanor drifted in and out of sleep. She woke once to the creak of floorboards, saw him sitting in a chair by the door, hat in his lap, head bowed. Another time, she found him at the stove, coaxing a flame into life, his profile lit by the faint glow of embers. He did not ask her name, nor press her with questions. He seemed content simply to keep her safe in silence. By dawn, her pain had dulled enough for thought to return. She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket he had draped over her shoulders. Outside, the roosters called, and the world was waking. Yet Eleanor felt suspended in a fragile stillness, a place carved away from judgment, where she could exist without flinching. She touched the cloth at her wrist and thought of the night before, of the way his voice had carried that vow, "I'll die before I hurt you." It lingered now like a tether against despair. For years she had believed kindness was a mask men wore before cruelty bared its teeth. But Silas had no mask. His silence was not emptiness but depth, like a well from which strength might be drawn. And though fear cautioned her heart, a flicker of something else, a timid spark, had begun to stir. Still, she knew the world outside that cabin door would not wait kindly. The town gossiped, and she was already the subject of its sharp tongues. Soon, they would spin tales of why she was here, what shame had driven her into another man's home. That storm waited, and she would have to face it. But not yet. Not this morning. For the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself the grace of rest. She lay back, eyes closing, breath easing. Beyond the window, the day unfurled in gold and blue, and somewhere nearby, she heard the steady sound of Silas chopping wood, a rhythm not of violence but of life, a steady heartbeat echoing through the valley. And though the world would surely rise against her again, she clung to one truth, small and steady: she was not alone. Morning in Silas Boone's valley broke with a brilliance Eleanor had almost forgotten existed. Light spilled like liquid gold across the grass, touching the boards of the cabin, painting the hills in gentle flame. She sat by the window, her knees drawn up beneath the borrowed blanket, and watched the mist rise from the earth as though the world itself exhaled. Her body still ached, the old wounds pulsing faintly beneath her skin, but it was not the ache that worried her. It was the sound of voices she imagined in town, the certainty that Mrs. Delaharo had already set her tongue to wagging. Shame had a way of traveling faster than any horse. Silas was outside splitting wood. His axe swung in quiet rhythm, neither hurried nor showy. Each strike was exact, as if precision mattered more than force. Eleanor studied him through the window, wondering at the steadiness he carried, as though storms had already passed through him and left him grounded instead of ruined. She did not know why he had chosen to help her. She did not yet trust that mercy came without cost. But when he set aside the axe, wiped his brow, and looked toward the cabin, his gaze held no expectation, only recognition, as though he had seen broken things before and knew they could be mended. By midday, she ventured outside, her bare feet tentative in the grass. He looked up from tending the corral, offered a nod, then went on with his work. That was his way. No questions, no pity, only space. She lingered near the fence, watching the horses move with restless grace. The silence stretched, not heavy but full, like a stream running beneath the earth. At last, he approached with a saddle in hand. "Ever ridden?" he asked. She shook her head. He adjusted the leather, then spoke softly, "We'll go slow." The words startled her, echoing the plea she had made in the field, echoing the vow he had answered. Something in her chest tightened, and for the first time she found herself wanting to believe him. He lifted her into the saddle, guiding her hands to the reins, and stood beside her as the horse shifted beneath her. Step by step, he walked her across the pasture, steadying her when she trembled, never rushing, never pressing. It was a small thing, yet to Eleanor it felt monumental, the gift of moving forward without fear. Days passed. She began helping with small tasks in the cabin, fetching water, mending a shirt, stirring a pot of beans. Each act was a reclamation, proof that her hands could build instead of only suffer. The air between them thickened with unspoken things, yet neither reached too quickly. Their connection was not born of declarations but of moments. The way he laid tools in her reach without being asked, the way she folded his shirts and left them neat on the chair, the quiet understanding that each had chosen not to name the pain that lived inside them. But peace was fragile. On the third morning, she walked into town to fetch flour. The chatter ceased the moment she entered the store. Mrs. Harrow, standing near the counter, turned with a smile sharp as glass. "Well, if it isn't the poor stray Boone dragged in. Didn't take you long to make yourself at home in his bed." Laughter rippled through the room. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, her throat close tight. She fumbled with the coins in her hand, unable to speak, every pair of eyes pinning her in place. When she returned to the cabin, Silas saw the tremor in her hands, the hollow look in her eyes. He said nothing, only took the sack from her and set it on the table. She wanted to rage, to weep, to vanish, but instead she sank onto the bench and whispered, "They'll never let me be." He crouched before her, his eyes level with hers, steady as stone. "You don't belong to their words," he said. "You belong to yourself." She shook her head. "You don't know what it's like." He did not argue. He only took her hand, calloused against fragile skin, and pressed it against his chest. The beat of his heart was slow, certain. "I know what it is to be broken down until you think you're nothing. But you're not nothing, Eleanor. You're still here. That's everything." The following week, necessity forced her into town again. Silas walked beside her this time. Their presence together drew stares like sparks in dry grass. At the store, Mrs. Harrow struck once more. "So it's true then. Boons taken in damaged goods. Fitting, I suppose. Two lost souls clinging to each other, waiting to sink." The crowd chuckled, cruel and eager. Eleanor's body froze, shame pricking her skin like needles. She wanted to vanish, to fall into the earth. Silas did not step aside. He turned to the gathered faces, his voice calm yet cutting through the murmurs like a blade through cloth. "You call her damaged. I call her the bravest soul I've ever seen. She's endured what would have broken most, and she's still standing. That's worth more than all your gossip combined." The room fell silent. Even Mrs. Harrow faltered, her mouth opening then snapping shut. Eleanor trembled, not from shame this time but from something fierce rising inside her. For years she had been defined by others' cruelty, bowed beneath its weight. Now, in the mirror of Silas's words, she glimpsed herself anew, not ruined, not cursed, but unyielding. Slowly, she lifted her chin. The act felt small, yet it burned brighter than any flame. The onlookers shifted, their laughter silenced, and for the first time, she was not invisible in her dignity. They left the store without another word. Outside, the air was sharp with autumn, the sky vast and unbroken. Eleanor's hands still shook, but inside her chest, something had steadied. She glanced at Silas walking beside her, his stride even, his face calm. Gratitude swelled, tangled with fear, tangled with hope. She did not speak it, but he seemed to know. That evening, back at the cabin, she stood at the doorway while the valley darkened into twilight. The world beyond remained cruel, but she understood now that cruelty could be met, not with fists, not with surrender, but with the quiet defiance of continuing to stand. Silas joined her, his hand brushing hers on the frame. They did not clasp, not yet. They did not need to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was a promise, waiting to be kept. The narrator's voice lingered like wind across the plain. Love does not arrive with thunder, nor with speeches meant to dazzle. It arrives in the vow of a man who will not harm, in the courage of a woman who chooses to rise again. And for those listening carrying wounds unseen, there is a lesson whispered across time. The world will try to name you broken, but the truth of your worth is yours alone to claim. Eleanor closed her eyes, the night air cool against her skin. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this: she was no longer afraid of standing tall.